The shoulder of I-10 was black beyond his headlights, and Colton Drake almost didn't stop. Shadow changed that. The German Shepherd rose upright, front paws pressed flat together against the dashboard, trembling, rigid, holding it like a salute at a funeral. Colton had seen it twice before. In Ramadi, when their interpreter bled out between burned vehicles. In Biloxi, when a veteran sat behind the wheel of a running car, eyes already somewhere else. Both times, Colton hadn't moved fast enough. He moved fast now. The man lay face down in the gravel, far enough from the road that headlights skimmed over him without catching. Dark jacket. Still. One arm bent wrong. When Colton turned him over, a federal badge wallet fell open. FBI, his special agent. And the man's eyes opened with the burning focus of someone finishing one last sentence before time ran out. He grabbed Colton's jacket. His voice was barely breath. They followed me here, and one of them is wearing a badge. Before we continue, let us know where you are watching from in the comments, and if this story moves you, please leave a like and subscribe. Now, let's continue with the story. Rain came down in sheets so thick Colton Drake could feel the road disappearing beneath his tires. He almost didn't stop. Almost. Shadow rose in the passenger seat the way he only did when the world needed fixing. Front paws pressed together, trembling, eyes locked on the darkness ahead, like a prayer made of muscle and instinct. Colton had seen that gesture twice before. Both times, someone was dying. He pulled over before his mind caught up with his foot on the brake. She was in the ditch. Face down in the mud. Auburn hair matted black with blood and rain. One arm stretched toward the road, like she'd been reaching for something that never came. He was out of the truck before it stopped rocking. 12 years of training didn't ask permission. His fingers found her neck, pulse, weak and thready. But there. He rolled her carefully. The FBI badge spilled from her jacket and landed in the mud like punctuation. Her eyes opened, green, sharp, fighting the dark with everything she had left. No hospitals, she breathed. Each word cost her something she couldn't afford to spend. They'll finish it. He was already into his cargo pocket. Gauze, pressure bandage, tourniquet, hands moving through a sequence carved into his nervous system by repetition and necessity. He found the wound fast, left side, below the ribs. Entry and exit, close range, deliberate. This wasn't a mugging. Someone had aimed at this woman and squeezed the trigger with the full intention of leaving her here to dissolve into the mud of a Mississippi ditch. Her car was 20 feet back. Driver's side caved in at an angle that physics alone couldn't explain. Someone had rammed her off the road first. Wide commercial tire marks on the asphalt. A truck. Then they'd walked up and finished it. She murmured one word before her eyes rolled back. Magnolia. Shadow stood over her like a sentry, muzzle raised, scanning the dark. Colton packed the wound, stripped his jacket, and pressed it against her side. Then he lifted her. She was lighter than combat, and heavier than grief. The body of a woman who had been running on mission fuel and sheer refusal for far too long. He laid her across the back seat. Her jacket fell open. Inside, taped against the lining with medical tape, was a small waterproof case. She had expected the worst and prepared for it anyway, and the worst had still come. He left it alone. Keeping her alive was his business first. Shadow jumped in. The truck moved. No sirens, no calls, no GPS. So the battery came out of Colton's phone and dropped into the center console. Whoever was listening to emergency channels would be waiting for a 911 report about a gunshot victim on Route 49. He wasn't going to give them that. He drove the way he'd been trained to move through hostile territory. Deliberate, quiet, alive to everything. The woman in the back seat drifted in and out, each breath a small argument with darkness. "What's your name?" he asked, not expecting an answer. "Sloan." A pause. "Merritt." "Sloan Merritt." "I'm Colton, Navy, wounds packed. You're going to make it, but I need you talking." "Through and through," she managed. "You're lucky." A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh if she'd had the strength for it. "Lucky left town about 8 months ago." Shadow pressed his nose through the gap between the seats, stretching toward her like he could hold her to the world by proximity. Colton watched it in the mirror and said nothing. Some things didn't need translation. She talked because she understood that talking kept people alive, and because 8 months of carrying this alone had hollowed her down to the bone, and she was done carrying it. The Magnolia Corridor. Women and children, mostly Central American, sometimes Eastern European, moving through Gulf Coast ports loaded into modified truck compartments and driven north through Mississippi and Alabama. Magnolia Freight handled the transport, and the man coordinating it all from inside a military installation or using Navy supply channels as cover, so no checkpoint ever looked twice at the trucks rolling alongside government convoys. Chief Warrant Officer Ray Hobbs, stationed at Stennis. Colton's knuckles went white on the wheel. "Navy?" His voice was controlled, careful. "Our Navy." Sloane's eyes found his in the mirror. "He operates out of Stennis. He has contacts inside the local sheriff's department, maybe on base." She swallowed. "My cover burned 48 hours ago. Someone inside my own field office sold me out. I don't know which of the 3 people who knew my identity gave Hobbs my route. I just know one of them did." The bayou pressed in on both sides of the dirt track as Colton turned off Route 49 without signaling, without brake lights, navigating by childhood memory and the ghost feel of a road that flooded every spring and didn't exist on any map that mattered. Then Shadow growled, low, deep, resonant as a bass string, his eyes locked on the side mirror, headlights, distant but steady, matching their speed. Colton killed his own lights. The road vanished. He drove blind through the dark, counting fence posts and drainage bridges the way another man might count prayers, and when he felt the dirt track beneath his tires, he turned hard without touching the brakes. Branches scraped the roof. Water churned under the chassis. The bayou swallowed them whole. In the mirror, the headlights swept past the turnoff without slowing. Colton let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. In the back seat, Sloan Merritt closed her eyes and kept breathing, which was the only victory that mattered right now. The fishing camp smelled like kerosene and old wood and the particular silence of a place that had kept secrets before. Colton carried Sloan inside and set her down on the cot before his arms gave out. Shadow swept the cabin without being told. Corners first, doorways second, then a slow circle around the cot before lying down against its frame, pressing his body to the wood like ballast. By lantern light, Colton stripped the soaked bandage and started again. Bottled water, field antiseptic, fresh packing. The bleeding had slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Infection was the next enemy, and this bayou humidity would send it fast. Sloan talked through the pain with her teeth set and her eyes fixed on the ceiling, because she'd come too far to stop now. And the micro SD card in the waterproof case held 8 months of evidence. Shipping manifests, financial transfers through shell companies, GPS logs showing Magnolia trucks rerouting at 3 in the morning to isolated properties with no business receiving cargo. The name at the top of the civilian side of the operation. Vernon Landry, Bayou Ridge businessman, church donor, Little League coach, the man whose trucks pulled over for stranded families in storms, and whose name was on every festival banner in the county. You don't question the man who tows your car out of a ditch at midnight, Sloane said quietly. You thank him. You tell your neighbors. You build his reputation for him without ever knowing what's inside those trucks. One name she trusted in 3 counties of compromised law enforcement. Sheriff Dale Cutter of Bayou Ridge. Our 8 months of vetting, financial records, personal history, surveillance, and she hadn't been able to connect him to Hobbs or Landry by a single thread. That wasn't the same as trust, but it was close enough. Then Sloane's cracked phone lit up on the cot beside her. An unknown number. 4 words glowing in the dark. Confirm the asset is neutralized. Someone was waiting for news that Sloane Merritt was dead. When that confirmation didn't arrive, they would stop waiting and start moving. Colton stared at the screen. Shadow stared at the door. Outside, the bayou made no sound at all, the way water goes quiet just before something breaks the surface. The boat came at 2 in the morning, a flat-bottom hull cutting through the rain with a spotlight sweeping the trees in long, patient arcs. Grid search pattern. Not random. Organized. Someone with operational discipline was running this sweep, and that meant Hobbs was directing it personally. Colton killed the lantern. Sloane rolled off the cot and pressed herself against the wall below the window line, moving with the disciplined precision of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of moment and was executing it on half a tank of blood. Shadow went silent on a single touch from Colton's hand. His growl dissolving into a vibration felt more than heard. The spotlight touched the tree line 50 yards out. Held. Moved on. When the engine sound faded, neither of them moved for 2 full minutes. Because in combat, and in the bayou, the second pass was always the one that killed you. At first light, Colton went back to Route 49 on foot. 40 minutes through knee-deep water, the mist clinging to everything, the world gray and still. Sloane's car sat where she'd left it. Driver's side caved, windshield spider-cracked, blood on the wheel. He found the gray weatherproof case under the passenger seat and was ready to move when something made him stop. A Magnolia freight tow truck sat 200 yards up the road. Engine off, lights off. But the block was still ticking. Warm metal cooling in the morning air. Recent. Someone had driven it here, parked it, and walked into the bayou on foot. Colton didn't run. He moved the way he'd been built to move, fast and low and quiet, carrying the laptop against his chest, retracing his path with the controlled urgency of a man who understood that speed, without silence, was just noise. 20 minutes in, a branch snapped to his left. Not wind, not an animal. A boot on wet wood, 40 yards out, moving parallel, heading toward the camp. He changed direction, cut east, added 15 minutes, and came at the cabin through the back wall. Shadow was growling inside. The low, controlled register that meant he had identified a threat and was waiting on the word. Colton came through the back window. No light, no sound. Sloane was already on the floor below the front window, a knife in her hand from somewhere he hadn't seen, her face white and set like a woman who had stopped being afraid and started being angry somewhere between the cot and the floor. A voice came through the cabin wall. Male. Say calm in the way ugly professionalism makes a man calm. Agent Merritt, I know you're in there. Blood trail from your car doesn't lie. A pause, conversational, patient. My name is Briggs. Hand over the card. We call a medic. Everybody goes home. Colton met Sloane's eyes across the dark. She shook her head once. Not a negotiation. A trap they both already understood. Opening this door in 30 seconds, Briggs continued. Colton moved to the hinge side of the door. He positioned Shadow with a hand signal. One gesture, one understood paragraph. 8 years of working together compressed into a single motion. He held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. The door came open, and Shadow went through it like a missile made of muscle and fury. 90 pounds of German Shepherd hitting Briggs' center mass before the pistol cleared leather. The gun discharged into the porch railing. Shadow's jaws locked onto the man's forearm, and Briggs made a sound that had nothing practiced in it. The real and unfiltered sound of a man being educated by an animal built for war. Colton was on him in 2 seconds. Face down, arm wrenched back, pistol kicked clear. Shadow, out! The dog released, backed 2 steps, and sat. Eyes locked, body vibrating, the patience of a trained animal that could wait all night for another signal and would. Zip-tied to the support beam, Briggs talked. Hobbs was at Stennis, running everything through encrypted radio and burner phones, never leaving the base during operations. Plausible deniability built into the architecture of his crimes. 12 to 15 people on the road tonight. Magnolia drivers, local contractors. He and 2 Bayou Ridge deputies on Hobbs's direct payroll. Their names, Ames and Dawson. Sloane absorbed every word from the doorway, leaning on the frame, pale and furious, and absolutely present. Colton left Briggs with water within reach, because he wasn't the kind of man who let someone die of thirst, even when they deserved worse. Then he looked at Sloane and said what they both already knew. We drive to Cutter. Dale Cutter was on his front porch when the truck pulled into his driveway, a shotgun across his knees and a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. He didn't stand up. He watched the headlights die and the door open, and a man in a mud-soaked Navy uniform step out with a German Shepherd at his heel. And he waited, the way a man waits when he's spent 30 years learning that trouble announces itself in its own time, and there is no point hurrying the introduction. Colton gave it to him straight, without softening. FBI agent, shot on Route 49, human trafficking through Magnolia Freight. A Navy officer named Hobbs running the operation out of Stennis, using military logistics as cover. 40 documented victims. An SD card with 8 months of evidence. And 2 deputies on this man's department, Ames and Dawson, on Hobbs's payroll. He watched Cutter's face. Sloane had said an honest man couldn't hide what he felt when children were being moved through his town. She was right. Cutter's expression didn't crack. It ignited. And something behind those weathered eyes caught fire, with the particular rage of a decent man discovering evil has been feeding on the goodwill he helped build. He swept the kitchen table with one arm, laid Sloane down on it, opened a first aid kit from under the sink that was better stocked than most ambulances, and went to work on her wound with hands that were rough but careful and absolutely certain. "Combat medic," he said, when Colton looked surprised. "My daddy taught me 2 things." While Cutter worked, Colton loaded the SD card into the air-gapped laptop. The files came up clean. Manifests, GPS logs, financial transfers, photographs. Cutter looked at the screen over his shoulder, and his hands went still for 5 full seconds. "How long?" he asked. His voice had changed. Quieter. Dangerous. "Duke, at least 3 years," Sloane said from the table. Cutter walked to the window. When he turned back, his face had settled into something Colton recognized from men who had stopped calculating risk and started calculating what was right. He made 2 calls, one to a federal judge he'd known since law school, one to 4 deputies he would trust with his life. Personal phones only. No radio, no department. The warrants came through in 20 minutes. The deputies arrived in 40. No one asked why. Good people don't need explanations when their sheriff's voice sounds like that. The checkpoint was everything legal procedure required it to be. Amber lights, reflective cones, 2 cruisers at the narrowest point of the bridge, documentation in order. From the outside, it looked like a routine weather safety stop. From the inside, it felt like a coiled spring. Shadow sat beside Cutter's cruiser and watched the road with the patience of an animal that understood hunting required stillness before the strike. Sloan worked the radio scanner in Colton's truck. 8 months of Magnolia's call signs and frequencies loaded into her memory like a second language. She heard them before the headlights appeared. Raven to North Star. Southbound clear. Packages rolling. Colton, 2 minutes. He relayed to Cutter. The checkpoint tightened. Every heart on that bridge was pounding, and nobody let it show. And the truck rolled in easy, amber bar light blinking, Magnolia Freight logo gleaming clean and trustworthy in the floodlights. The perfect performance of a company that wanted to be seen. The driver lowered his window. Mid-30s, practiced smile, eyes that were too sharp for a routine stop and knew it. Cutter asked for license and work order the way a man asks who hasn't slept in 36 hours and has run entirely out of tolerance for deception. Deputy Mercer noticed the work order first. Something wrong with the formatting. Small, almost invisible. The kind of detail a young deputy notices because nobody told him yet what to stop looking for. Then a radio squawk from the cab. One clipped syllable, then silence. Shadow's head snapped up. His body locked. One sharp bark, and he was moving, nose working the truck's undercarriage, tight controlled passes along the seams. He alerted on a welded compartment behind the toolbox bracket. Mercer crouched with his flashlight, and his voice went tight. Sealed pouches. Falsified pharmaceutical labels. And underneath, documents. Not invoices. Not shipping orders. Names. People. The driver broke in 4 minutes. Then the scanner crackled with a deeper voice, controlled, the voice of command. All units, abort southbound. Checkpoint compromised. Secondary route active. Cutter's jaw locked. He checked his phone. Ames and Dawson were already gone. Off duty. No destination logged. 40 minutes ahead of the call. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, he gave Mercer the warehouse address and Judge Oakes's warrant number and watched his deputy drive away into the dark. Then he looked at Colton. "Sees Stennis," he said. The drive to the base was 40 minutes of dark highway and silence. Cutter drove. Shadow rode between them in the cab, ears forward, body tense. Neither man spoke because the evidence had already said everything that needed saying, and what remained was only the doing of it. The gate opened for a county badge, a federal warrant, and the face of a man who had outrun his patience for every comfortable lie the world had offered him. They found Hobbs in his office, composed, a briefcase open on the desk beside him, the posture of a man who had prepared for this conversation and believed preparation would be enough. He looked up when the door opened and saw a county sheriff in a duty jacket, a Navy SEAL in a mud-soaked combat uniform, and a German shepherd whose brown eyes held the particular quality of judgment that no rank in any branch of service was designed to deflect. "Chief Warrant Officer Hobbs," Cutter said. "You're under arrest." Hobbs leaned back. The smile was practiced and immediate. "Sheriff, I think there's been a misunderstanding. 40 people. Colton stepped forward. Shadow stepped with him. Women and children. 3 years you ran them through Navy logistics, like they were freight. And you had a good woman shot on a highway because she found out. The smile held, but the eyes changed. The pupils contracted. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. And what lived behind it wasn't guilt. It was calculation. The rapid arithmetic of a cornered man sorting through exits and deciding which people he could spend to buy himself one. I want my lawyer. Cutter nodded to the military police who had followed them in. The handcuffs clicked. That sound, small, metallic, final, echoed in the office like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken 3 years to write. In the doorway, Hobbs looked back at Colton. This is bigger than you think, sailor. Bigger than a county sheriff and 1 wounded agent. Colton didn't move. I stopped for a dog. The dog led me to a woman. The woman led me to you. I didn't need to understand how big it was. I just needed to find the next door. Then Sloane's voice came through his phone. Thin, exhausted, and absolutely unbroken. She had cracked the second encrypted file. Hobbs wasn't the top. He was the field commander. And Vernon Landry's voice, unmistakable, casual, laughing at the 11-minute mark, was on 23 minutes of recording, authorizing every shipment, every route, every price negotiated for human beings, with the same ease a man uses to schedule a furniture delivery. Colton looked toward Bayou Ridge. Somewhere out there, a man who coached Little League and kept his name on the church bulletin was sleeping peacefully under a reputation he had built with stolen money and borrowed trust. Shadow's ears turned toward the same darkness. His paws pressed together once, brief and deliberate. Not a plea, a promise. 1 week changed Bayou Ridge the way a single match changes a house. From the outside, everything looked the same. Inside, the foundation was ash. Mercer's team hit the Magnolia warehouse within the hour. What they found inside shut every deputy who walked through that door down to the bone. Restraints, modified transport containers with ventilation holes drilled at child height, a staging area cataloged by number, sorted by destination, stacked with the cold administrative evidence of men who had long since stopped thinking of their cargo as human. Mercer sat on the bumper of his cruiser afterward and cried. He was 26 years old, and he told Cutter later that he'd aged a decade in 10 minutes. Ames and Dawson were picked up at the state line with cash, burner phones, and a Magnolia radio in the trunk. Dawson talked the whole way through the arrest. Ames stared at the dashboard and watched his life collapse without a word. Sloane's handler, the Corian, one of 3 people who had known her identity, was picked up in Washington on Thursday. He had taken payments through his wife's real estate business for 2 years. He asked for a deal before they finished reading him his rights. $60,000. That was the price of a woman's life, and 8 months of undercover work, and 40 names that almost disappeared forever. The federal task force arrived Monday. 12 agents, 3 vehicles, no sirens. They set up in the back room of the county courthouse while Cutter stood guard at the door. Sloane briefed them from a wheelchair and refused a hospital bed until the briefing was complete. The lead agent, a 20-year veteran named Torres, told Colton afterward that he had never seen anyone deliver intelligence that clean while running a fever of 102. At 7 on Monday morning, every door in Vernon Landry's life closed at the same time. The warrants landed simultaneously. Federal agents at his home, state police at Magnolia Freight headquarters, NCIS sweeping Hobbs's network at Stennis. 47 charges: trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering, RICO. The voice on the recording, laughing at the 11-minute mark, would play in a courtroom and end every lie he had ever built. On the pier, the Saturday before, Landry had reached for Shadow and pulled his hand back from something he couldn't name. The dog had looked at him with those still, brown eyes and seen straight through the smile to the man underneath. And Landry had felt, probably for the first time in 3 years, the specific discomfort of being seen. Now the whole world was looking. And the 40 names on Sloane's micro SD card stopped being case numbers. They became people again, with faces, families, and futures that had been stolen by men in clean clothes with friendly smiles who had believed for 3 years that nobody would ever stop on a dark road in the rain to check what was dying in the ditch. But someone had. Because a dog pressed his paws together, and a man who had learned to listen to things he couldn't fully explain pulled over in the dark and chose the harder thing. On the pier at sunset, Sloane put her hand on Shadow's back. Colton put his beside hers. The dog pressed his paws together one last time, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Not a prayer for rescue, not a plea for someone to come. Just gratitude, quiet and enormous, offered by a creature who had done the only thing he knew how to do, and watched it become something that looked, from the outside, exactly like grace. The miracle wasn't loud. It never is. It was a pause, a choice, a moment when something said, "Stop," and a man obeyed it, even without knowing why. And that was enough. That has always been enough.